All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the third and final workshop for the 2021 Epistemic Diversity Workshop Series. I'm Arains Pelayo, a PhD candidate at UIC, co-organizer of this workshop series, and moderator for today's last workshop session. The theme for today is mentoring relationships. And our speakers today, Professor Denise Lloyd and Professor Justin Bruner, will be walking us through some key parts of this question theme. We will also have a breakout group session today before the 5-minute break. And we will also have some questions to facilitate that breakout group session. Before I introduce our first speaker today, I will ask you to please type in hand or finger in the chat so that the speakers or I can call on you to ask your question. Okay. And all right, our first speaker today is Professor Denise Lloyd. Currently, she is a professor of management and business administration at the University of Urbana-Champaign's College of Business. She's also been recently named First Associate Dean of Equity for the college. Before joining UIUC, she was a faculty member at MIT Sloan School of Management. Her research focuses on group dynamics and organizational behavior, particularly examining with an experimental approach the effects gender, race, educational background, and political affiliation have in group interactions and what individual, interpersonal, and ethical consequences they might have. Professor Lloyd is the author of several articles published in leading presses and journals and media outlets as well. Her most recent work, published in the Journal of Business Research, is titled, "Does Perceived Treatment of Unfamiliar Employees Affect Consumer Brand Attitudes? Social Dominance Ideologies Reveal Who Cares the Most and Why." Today, she's going to give us a talk on mentorship, sponsorships, and coaches. Please join me in welcoming Professor Denise Lloyd.
Thank you so much, Arains, for that wonderful introduction, and thanks to all of you. My one request in Zoom spaces is, as much as people are able and willing to turn on their cameras, I very, very much welcome that because I get energy from seeing people's faces and expressions. So if that's at all available to you, I would very much appreciate turning on cameras. I am excited to talk with you today about mentoring and just relationships that can help our careers and from my perspective, just enhance our lives. So because I have been the recipient of some wonderful mentoring in my career and sponsorship and coaching as well. And I've also been on the receiving end of some not so amazing mentoring. So I love to talk about how this connects to, for each of you and your role as a student, as faculty member, future faculty member, because in this career, we all often play these roles for others and others play them for us. So with that, I will start sharing my screen. Let's see. Seeing that? Yep, okay, great. So mentoring relationships, well, actually, it's on the wrong thing, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about 3 different types of what I call here career enhancing relationships, but I've already indicated that they can really be relationships that enhance us and not just our careers, but really enrich our lives. And that's coach, mentor, and sponsor. And briefly, when thinking about the differences between those 3, and I'll go into each in more detail. Coaches really are guides. They are helping us learn new skills, new opportunities, new tools and new techniques that we may not have experience with. Mentors are more in the space of providing advice. It's a relationship that often builds over time, and they are really helping us because they have experienced something before in a similar space that we have not, figure out how to navigate challenges and opportunities. And then sponsors are really in a much more strong role of an advocate and someone who's really promoting you and creating oftentimes opportunities for you to move up into another level. So let's start with a coach. Basic definition: a coach is a person who helps you develop new skills. And when I think about coaching, it's important to recognize that anyone who has a skill set that you do not have can be a coach. So oftentimes we think about these types of relationships and we think about, age, that somebody has to be older than us or more experienced kind of in numerous ways than we are to play this role. But my son, who's a good chess player, could be a coach for me in that space, right? So that when we think about coaching, it's about trying to get access to certain skills, certain techniques, certain information that we may not have access to. That could, in our space, look like methodological differences or new analysis tools, or perhaps you are interested in targeting your work to a journal that you have not previously submitted work to, right? Somebody could help coach you in something as simple as what's the format that makes more sense for that journal, or it could be, the introduction might look very different for journal X versus journal Y. And so that's a coach that can help you. They provide input, they provide feedback, they have knowledge and expertise that you do not. Coaches can be paid, but oftentimes, we're not paid to do this type of work. But I think an important takeaway with the coach is just to think broadly, because it's anyone who has that skill set that you don't have, you can reach out to, and they can help you develop that skill set, and you can play the same role for someone else. Now we're going to move into mentors. We hear a lot about mentoring in some in academia, certainly in the world of business, and thinking about having mentors, how mentors can help people really develop in their careers, whether there should be formal mentorship programs. And we may have already experienced participating in a mentorship program or being asked to mentor someone else. It happens at all kinds of levels, right? From high school students moving into college, every kind of step along the way. So you may already have played the role of mentor, and I would not be surprised if you have formally or informally, even more likely, in the lives of other people. So what are we talking about when we think about mentoring? So a mentor is a person who can support, advise, and guide you. So the coach is, again, about a specific kind of set of skills. Mentoring is much more general. It's not just about helping me understand how to do this analysis that I haven't done before. It's really about furthering you and building you and allowing you to progress in your career, being an advisor, someone who you can turn to when you're unsure about things, someone who has had experience in what you are anticipating in the future. So, for example, I was very fortunate for my dissertation advisor, to become a very strong mentor. And most advisors, I think, would play that role. But you do not have to have a formal relationship like the individual being your advisor for them to be a successful and a strong mentor for you. Mentors can be a more professional relationship, or it may turn into a relationship that spans professional and personal, where the person really becomes a friend. I've been lucky with my advisor, that is the relationship that developed. But someone could be a strong mentor for you, even if they do not feel like your friend. What is important, though, is a person in a position to help you further your goal. So someone that has that deep knowledge. The mentor really needs to be kind of industry specific, right? Or whatever area you are involved in, so that they understand the landscape that you are dealing with. They understand the challenges and the opportunities, the path to success. It's also really important for a mentor to for the relationship between a mentor and a mentee to be personal, and for it to be, held in confidence. So this is someone that you trust, you can go to when things are not going well, when you're uncertain about what to do. One of the things about these types of relationships is that sometimes we are feel uncomfortable being vulnerable, saying, I do not know what I'm doing. Right, I'm really not sure what to do next. And a strong mentoring relationship is one that has that level of trust and safety so that you can be vulnerable, right? They need to understand what are the challenges that you're experiencing so that they can help you with those. Whereas in other relationships, perhaps it's a relationship with your boss, and it may feel like if I'm vulnerable, or if I imply that I really don't know how to do this thing, that's not going to be received well. Perhaps in that space, that boss is not the best person to be a mentor for you. And you can find that safe space externally to that, boss subordinate relationship. So when we think about mentoring, just a few guidelines I like to share, both for things that mentors perhaps should think about doing and should not think about doing, as well as mentees, which I'll share in just a moment. So again, mentorship is expertise based. So, you have experience and expertise, and you're helping somebody who's interested in being in a similar space. Accessibility is really important. So if you have agreed to be someone's mentor, you do need to make yourself available to them. That doesn't mean that your time gets to be abused, but if you really are too busy to take on a role where you cannot a priori know exactly when an individual is going to need that help. So if you have no flexibility, then that might be challenging for you to really play a role as a strong mentor. Setting boundaries, being clear about the relationship and the expectations around contact, right? That could be a good way to figure out if it is a good fit between the mentor and the mentee. Making sure that you're treating the mentee in a professional way, respectfully and ethically, right? Not trying to take advantage of the individual, and being professional. And some of the don'ts, again, don't take on more than you can, reasonably manage. Again, in that respectful space, right? This is a person who's relying on you, so it's not for you to use them as a source of labor or to talk out of turn. I talked about that confidentiality and that safety space. So, you really have to take this relationship seriously and recognize that holding information and confidence is really important. And also don't micromanage. I mean, one thing that I will also add to this is in some of the mentoring relationships that I've had, and this will come up a little bit more later as well, because I want to talk about in the space of a conversation around diversity, how do we navigate, working with, mentoring, advocating for, sponsoring individuals who are similar to ourselves and those who are dissimilar from ourselves, and the challenges or experiences of being mentored or sponsored by someone who may be similar to you or different from you demographically. One really important thing I think for mentors is recognizing that you are trying to guide this person and this person is not you. So they may not do things exactly the same way. They have a different personality, they have different concerns and fears and strengths, right? And weaknesses. And so not using this standard of just here's how I did it and here's how you should do it, but rather really trying to understand who that person is and how to help them find their way. So that just speaks to this not micromanaging piece. What about the mentee? So I think another thing sometimes that happens with mentoring and relationships is that the person being mentored is sort of like, it's all up to the mentor, right? Like, it's them, right? They get to decide. They're going to step up. Like my responsibility is just to sit back and soak in all of the knowledge and the wisdom. But really, there is a role that the mentee plays as well, and some things that mentees should and should not do when they move into these kinds of relationships. So, there's going to be similar themes connecting between the two, and really setting some expectations, some goals. What is it that you're hoping to get out of this? For mentees, I think it's really important to recognize that one mentor is not sufficient for any of us, right? There are different there may be different interests that you have, and potential career paths, and so even on that level, having different individuals who have those different experiences who can help you is really important. But even if there's one career path, just recognizing that between time limitations of individuals, just human differences, right? Just getting different perspectives about how people have dealt with similar contexts is really important and helpful. And also an ability to tap into different elements of identities that are important for you are reasons enough to recognize that having multiple mentors can be very helpful, as well as people at different stages of their career. So if you're a student, you might have somebody who's at the postdoc level, or an early new faculty member, or somebody who's been tenured, and then someone who's further along, right? That there's relationships and many things that you can learn, and then you're not putting all of your expectations and hopes onto one individual. So setting expectations, being proactive, making sure that you keep in contact. I am really not great when it comes to email. It is really not a favorite thing of mine, and I have what I call a 24-hour rule for relationships with people who I recognize I may not respond right away, and then I don't want there to be that awkwardness of like, well, should I reach out? Am I bothering the person? So I have a 24-hour rule. It's like, if you haven't heard back from me in 24 hours, this is for my doctoral student, you just poke me. Like, it's not, you're required to poke me. So it's taken all of the stress off of you. Are you bothering me? No, you're bothering me if you don't poke me, because this is a very important relationship, and me not responding probably just means that I'm, once again, like underwater here, like struggling to get my nose above water. So setting some ground rules, being professional is really important, especially as, it always, but as you are developing this relationship with the person, you want to maintain boundaries that allow trust and allow the relationship to develop in whichever way it is going to develop. It may end up being a very close friendship, but you don't want to assume that too soon, right? So make sure that you are being professional, being ethical, being thoughtful about the person's time, being on time. If you cannot show up, giving advance notice. I mean, simple things like that really make a big difference. Know that they're not here to solve your problems. They're here to give you advice. You have to take responsibility for the choices that you make. So being upfront about that, I think, also helps, because, other people don't want to feel like, well, I suggested they do this thing, and they did it, it didn't work out. Like, is that all my fault? No, right? We have to be responsible for the decisions that we make with the advice of our mentors. Similarly, don't gossip about the person. And I think it's also important that we recognize that sometimes we might reach out to someone and say, would you be willing to act as a mentor? And they may say no, and we shouldn't take that personally. And we should keep asking other people, and we might even circle back at some later point in time, right? It might not be the right time for that relationship. So try not to take it personally. All right, now let me quickly talk a little bit about sponsorship and advocacy. So Mentors can act as advocates. Sponsors are advocates. And what do we mean by advocate? Somebody who's publicly supporting the interests of another person. Someone who knows about your work, speaks up for you. One of the things that's really valuable about advocacy is, while self-promotion is really important, we should recognize the value that we bring and we should speak to that. There is something more legitimate even about someone else speaking up on your behalf. And so sponsorship can be really important. They don't have to be a friend. Anyone can be an advocate, and advocacy really increases the opportunity for advancement, because other people are saying, I worked with Denise, I think she would be a great, editor, co-editor on this volume, or a great discussant for this conference, or a collaborator, on this project. So advocacy really matters. Sponsorship is a special form of advocacy. Senior level individuals who are using their position, using their voice to create opportunities. And I have been thrilled to be the recipient of some strong sponsorship as well in my academic career, including, an individual. I mean, there may be individuals who, always want you to come to their institution. I mean, that's always a nice, signal that someone values you and recognizes your talents. But things like including you on, as part of a conference that they are organizing, inviting you to be a, co-editor on a special issue. Those are very strong acts of sponsorship, as well as speaking up on your behalf to others who have opportunities that they may be aware of that you're not aware of, because you're, don't have access to those spaces to speak up on your behalf. So when we are in a position to act as sponsors for others, I encourage us to do so, recognizing that sponsorship really can make a difference in the careers of individuals. And in particular, again, if we're in this space talking about diversity, recognizing that individuals who are in what some refer to now as minoritized groups or underrepresented groups don't have the same networks, right, that allow access and awareness of some of those opportunities. And so we really can help by acting in that sponsorship way. Now, I'm going to quickly talk a little bit about these dynamics of advocacy, sponsorship, and mentorship, if you will, between individuals who are similar to each other, or what, in my universe of psychology, social psychology, they talk about as in-group members, or individuals who you see as different from yourself, so an out-group. And the punchline is basically, whichever direction it is, right? Whether we are mentoring someone or being mentored by someone, or sponsoring someone or being sponsored by someone who is similar to us or different from us in important and salient ways, there are opportunities and challenges in both of those contexts. When we are interacting with someone who's similar to us, opportunities do include having a better understanding of that person's background and context, and having their easier formation of relationships because we perceive these similarities. However, being similar on the surface absolutely does not guarantee connection. And I think we want to be careful about, making that assumption. And we have to remember this concept of intersectionality. So we have multiple salient identities, some of which will be similar and some of which will be different from individuals that we're interacting with. So even if we are both similar with respect to gender, perhaps we're different with respect to race. And if we're not taking these different social categories and identities into consideration, we may be making some assumptions that then are disrupted. And I've definitely had that experience. One other challenge when it comes to advocating for similar others is a concern, especially when the thing that makes similar to each other is something that's underrepresented and therefore salient to other people as well. And some of my research falls in this space is, how is my advocacy going to be seen? Is it as legitimate when it comes from me? And, I'm a Black female and advocating for another Black female student or colleague. Am I going to be discounted? In terms of outgroup advocacy, opportunities, and I think this is really important for us to think about when we are in a minority category or underrepresented in some way, where we are more likely to be mentored by or sponsored by someone who does not share our category, that there are opportunities in both directions. For that individual speaking up for you, there isn't a sense of increased legitimacy by others relative to when an in-group member advocates for you. And on both sides, you have access to different networks, different information. My research is about the, power of diversity for bringing new information, new perspectives, different opinions to our, decisions, our, activities. And so this is really valuable, and it's something that we should not take for granted, and we should recognize and actively, proactively, try to engage with it. On the challenges side, recognizing that, again, as I said, with the mentoring, there are differences, and what worked for me may not work for this person. So when I'm giving advice, when I'm, engaging, keeping that in mind and recognizing the differences, and avoiding what I like to call the savior mindset. So, this person is not deficient in some way. They are a high performer. You see their value and try to amplify that value. You're not here to fix someone or, reverse some sort of deficit. Okay. Let's see. All right. And so I'm going to thank you for that. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Lorenz, or we're going to move into a breakout to give you a little bit of an opportunity to process through some of the things that we've talked about. And thinking about mentoring, ask yourself the following questions, and I will try now to put it in the chat. What is involved in finding a mentor in your field? Maybe do you have a mentor currently? More than one, right? Should you be thinking about having another mentor? Where would you look for that person? What gets in the way of relationships, smooth and successful mentorships? And what kinds of different expectations might you perhaps have had before and have, that have been changed through this conversation? So I've put in the chat these questions. When we go into breakout rooms, I don't think you're going to see this chat. I can't remember. Will you see this? Now I think you will, right? Because I put it in there in the general chat. I think so. If not, copy it right now. Go in and copy that. The questions that I put in the chat, and then we're going to put you into breakout groups. Am I doing that? Okay, here. And then we're going to come back, and then we'll have some time for sharing out, your ideas from the breakouts, and an opportunity to ask questions about what I presented. And thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording and break. Sorry.
Okay. I don't know. Namesake, you called me out. So I think one of the things that we came up with was to be aggressive. One of our members mentioned that he actually did some emailing to contact people who weren't, directly involved. And I kind of think you just have to get out there and make an effort. It's not like high school where there's a open door counselors just waiting for you to come in. You got to kind of get out and look for them. Did anybody else have any other experiences?
That's great. Thank you so much, Denise, for getting us started. And yes, it is definitely not the open night, the counselor's office, right? And the further we go, we recognize these are far from 40-hour-a-week jobs, right? These roles are can be all encompassing if we allow them to be, but even with trying to maintain boundaries, they take a lot of time and attention and focus, and there are many demands. And so I think that persistence, the poke, I mean, not, if you don't have the 24-hour rule, like I've given people, don't use that, right? Don't poke them again in 24 hours, but you could give it a week and do one of those like, oh, just not sure this ended up in your spam kind of things. Just want to make sure you hadn't missed this. We should not take silence to mean they're not interested. It really just could have ended up not, got off their email radar, so to speak. The other thing I would say, and I definitely want to hear from others, is, paying attention to signals individuals are giving you of interest and support, and, stepping into that, right? So when you are in a talk and afterwards, I mean, it's a little bit harder in Zoom, of course, right? But after the talk, when people are milling around or someone asks a question and you thought, oh, that's interesting, or you said something and they said, what Denise said was very interesting, or I'm building off of that, right? That's an opening for a connection that has a basis in some, shared interest or experience or something, right? So just paying attention to those even seemingly small things and using them as ways to approach, because it can, it's kind of like a cold call. It feels very like, they don't know me, I'm just going to randomly email this person or something, So putting yourself in spaces, in talks, conferences, even, could I sit in on your class? Like, I'd like to learn more about this topic or your style, or, just building that's kind of coaching light, right? This creates an opportunity. So thank you again for getting us started. What other brave individuals do we have out here to share something that came out of your breakout conversation?
Alanda, it seems like she raised her hand.
I'm so used to we use the raise hand in our class.
No, thank you. No, I appreciate that. I wasn't paying close attention, so thank you.
We in my group, I think most of us pretty much had already had like long-standing mentorships, but I mentioned that I found my mentor through a program that I just checked the website. It's kind of geared more so towards STEM majors. So I'm not really sure how it works, but other sorts of careers. But it's really great because, like you were just mentioning, you kind of have to put yourself out there. And this website, I can link it in the chat. It's the mentors there, they go to sign up themselves, so because they're looking for mentorships. So for me, that was a really great resource.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. And I had you not said that, I would not have known that kind of a resource exists. But then it means we can all go, Googling and checking our other things to see what other things might there be out there in each of our, areas that we aren't aware of that exist, where people have said they would like to mentor others. Thanks, Alana. Any more raised hands that I was missing or reactions?
I'll just go. One issue that was raised by somebody in our group was she had often as part of mentoring programs started relationships with mentors, but none of them seemed to really last. And then on the flip side, I'm in a mentoring program where I'm mentoring undergraduates, and one of them, it's like worked great. We kept talking. The others, it just kind of fizzles away. And so it's kind of hard to see how to kind of find a place where you can actually keep that going.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Dave. That definitely resonates, and I have a few reactions to it. One is, it's okay. I think especially if if it didn't fizzle right away, I mean, that might be okay too, because that might be an indicator that it's not going to be a good fit. But if had a relationship and a connection, and it's run its course, and we're in a space, of course, where change is the constant. I mean, change is the constant, period. But people are going to come in, they're going to progress, they're going to graduate, they're going to move on. There are many factors, including time zone differences, can really have a challenge, can challenge making connections and building relationships. So it may be the case that it served its need, and you help them in some way. And, maybe instead of a mentor, they really needed a coach, and you help them figure that thing out, and they've moved on, and that's all right. If you are in a situation where, you're having a hard time kind of making those connections, I think it is important to, acknowledge it in some way, right? I mean, if it's kind of an elephant in the room, so, maybe it's about having not set those expectations at the beginning of what's the role that, the mentor's playing and the mentee, and expectations around, how we communicate with each other, when, what latitude we're giving for, whatever it might be, right? Being late, or what expectations I have for kind of how you show up to this space, right? Is there quote unquote homework? Is there something that I want you to bring? Or are we just, getting together periodically? How often am I thinking? So the mentor is thinking, yeah, if we meet, a couple times a semester, that's great. And the mentee's thinking, oh yeah, every week we're gonna get together. So they're sending you these emails and you're not replying because you don't have the capacity for that. Like, just those disconnects can, exacerbate tensions or underlying, just misunderstandings. The other thing that I will say is, when we are the mentor, in general, I think it's important to recognize power differentials, hierarchy, and relationships. And while all of us can feel vulnerable in some ways, I like to say that the individuals who are more vulnerable are those who do not have the power, right? They will not feel as comfortable speaking up. And so as the mentor, you really have to proactively create a safe space and invite people. That's kind of my 24-hour rule. Like, it's your job to poke me, right? I'm not just going to say, hey, I'm accessible anytime, or hey, if I don't respond, don't worry about it, just reach out again, right? Does reach out again mean 3 days later? Does it mean a week later? Like, what are your parameters? So saying, hey, if I don't reach out, if I don't respond, it's, I consider it your job to poke me again. Like, that is, you are doing your job and fulfilling your part of your role with me if you do that. And if you don't do it, and then in meetings, I literally say, you didn't poke me, right? Like, I mean it. So creating, safety, allowing people to, be vulnerable, because it can be vulnerable. And I talked about building trust, and that the mentor relationship is strongest if they truly know your strengths and weaknesses and the concerns that you have. And, but those can be really hard to share sometimes. So we have to work hard to create a space that people are willing to be vulnerable in. Yeah, thanks, Dave. Any others? Or I guess general Q&A. I'm happy to, take a question, or if something really resonated with you. I'm also happy to recognize that it is Friday. I had a colleague that said Zoom day, there's Zoom day, and there's weekend. So, and pass the mic to my esteemed colleague. I think we're good for now. I mean, there's more to go. And so if things come up, we can always, address those later. So thank you all so much for your time and attention. I appreciate it. And I'm turning it back over to you, friends.
All right, yeah, thank you so much for your talk. And thank you for all your questions as well. So I guess now we'll just take the 5-minute break and we'll reconvene at like 4:28, 4:30. All right. So. And yeah, and introduce our second speaker for today. All right, so it's time for our second talk of the day. Our second speaker is Professor Justin Bruner. Currently, he is a professor at the Department of Political Economy and Moral Science at the University of Arizona. Before starting at the University of Arizona, he was a faculty member at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. His research areas are in the philosophy of science, political philosophy, and social epistemology, and uses formal and experimental tools from the biological and social sciences to approach his research. Professor Bruner has authored many articles, published in top journals, and discussed in various media outlets. His paper, Inequality and Majority Rule, is forthcoming in Analysis, and recently his paper, How to Beat Science and Influence People, Policymakers and Propaganda and Epistemic Networks, was discussed in the MIT Tech Review. Today he's going to give us a talk and field our questions about mentorships in graduate school and academia. Please join me in welcoming Professor Justin Bruner.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And thanks to you for coming, everyone. And especially thanks to the organizers for putting on not one, but 3 of these workshops. That's a lot of work. Yeah, so I'm really happy to be here. And I'm very much appreciate the invitation to talk today. And I'm going to be saying a few words about navigating graduate school with a special focus on mentorship. All right, so I've been involved in mentoring relationships from both ends, both as a mentoree and a mentor. And so many of my comments are going to be sort of rooted in these experiences and the experiences of my friends and colleagues as well. So as mentioned, my academic focus and research is in game theory and political philosophy, not mentorship. So you'll have to excuse me if all this sounds a bit inchoate. I also prepared, so one more qualification, I also prepared this talk with sort of philosophy students in mind. So in particular, focusing on graduate school in philosophy. And so my apologies for those not working in this area. And maybe we can talk in Q&A about how some of the recommendations do or don't translate into other disciplines as well. Right. Okay, well, I have a couple slides prepared, but I'm gonna sort of share my screen now and then so people can see them, but for the most part, I'll just be sort of talking like this. Okay, so graduate school, right? Difficult, trying time. That's not telling you anything new. You're going to need support. Nothing new as well, right? Not just mental and emotional support, but of course you're going to need sort of the help, advice, sort of knowledge of others in order to help achieve your goals, right? And so I think a sensible place to start, at least, the discussion is laying out what exactly are one's goals initially. And I realize we have a mixed audience here. So we have some undergrads who are maybe working on their undergraduate thesis, maybe thinking about applying to graduate school. We have some graduate students in the early days, some graduate students toward the end of their PhD, and we even have some postdocs and assistant professors here. Right? And so the talk is going to be addressed to those considering graduate school or in the sort of early stages of grad school. And so I think, so the goals, right, to keep in mind are sort of twofold. So first, right, one wants to, successfully write and defend the dissertation, right, to get that nice piece of paper with your name on it, right, giving you the right to correct people when they don't refer to you as doctor. And secondly, and I think more importantly, right, most want to continue in this line of work, right? So the PhD isn't, sort of a terminal degree that you then leave after for industry, right? At least that's less common in philosophy, right? Okay, so if that's the goal, oops, sorry, so I'm going to share my screen for a second. All right, can everyone see this? Yeah, it should be blank. Yeah, okay. Okay, good. Okay, so if that's the goal, let's sort of think backwards, right? So let's use what social scientists sometimes refer to as backwards induction, right? So we start from our goal, and then we think sort of backwards in time to determine how to best reach our desired endpoint, right? And so this is a sort of thought process that I went through, at least when I was starting, right? So here I am, sort of a fresh-faced, baby-faced, undergraduate thinking of going on to the next stage of academia and doing a PhD. And so here I am sort of looking down the road, right? And if you want to find employment as an assistant professor, right? If you want to get a postdoc or a professorship, it's probably a good idea to have sort of a clear understanding of what exactly, right, the job entails, right? What a professor does, right? Now, of course, you all have a sense of this, right? So just by being at university, you see them perform one of, I'd say, the two primary jobs, right? Which is teaching. And of course, professors are expected to research, right, and disseminate their research by publishing in journals, right? And that's basically it, right? So that's the job, right? So provide 2, 3, maybe 4 courses a semester, depending on your institution. Read, write, and publish. Right? Now, of course, there's also, admin, meeting, supervision, right? But let's just keep it simple and ignore all that, right? Just focus on the sort of 2. Okay, so if you want a job, right, and if that's what the job consists of, then as a job applicant, right, sort of it behooves one to, have evidence that you can successfully sort of perform these tasks, right? And what better evidence than actually teaching your own course, right? And what better evidence than actually publishing original research in respected, right, venues, right, in good journals. And so, by the time you're maybe a 6th year, 7th year graduate student, right, you will hopefully have had sort of some experience teaching independently, and perhaps even had the good fortune, right, to publish a journal article, right, or if not, maybe you have an article under review or intend to submit or about to submit, in that ballpark. Okay, so I should say that this is not sort of a science, right? These are all benchmarks, right? And there are people who are very successful and they didn't have all their ducks lined up in a row by the end of graduate school, right? But I'd say roughly speaking, you want to finish grad school. And once again, I should qualify this. I'm thinking primarily of philosophy. And so there are going to be sort of differences between disciplines, right? But you should want to finish graduate school with a publication or 2, right? And some experience teaching on your own, right? And what that means is that sometime earlier in your graduate career, right, you need to begin thinking seriously about these tasks, right? And these early years of graduate school are, in my mind, right, the most stressful and demanding. And why is that? Well, I think you're making what is sort of most difficult is the most difficult transition in your academic career, right? So as an undergraduate, you take classes, you write short papers, right? Now you still have classes and coursework in graduate school, but in addition to that, you're trying to become a teacher, right? You're trying to hone your pedagogical skills, and you're also trying to become an independent, right, researcher, an independent scholar, right? And so in the course of those first 2 or 3 years of graduate school, you're essentially trying to get to the point where you can do the job of a professor, where you can teach and publish, right? That's a lot to do in the course of 3 or 4 years, right? And so the transition is really massive, the transition from undergrad to grad, right? The transition from grad student to a postdoc or grad student to assistant professor, I think, pales in comparison, right? So life as a postdoc or an assistant professor, in many ways, it's just sort of a natural, right, continuation of the last 2 years of a PhD program, typically, right? Where in the last couple of years, you're teaching, you're doing independent research, right? You're working on your dissertation, right? So the bar might be raised a little bit, right, when you are a postdoc or an assistant professor, right? So perhaps you're expected to publish more and you have to teach a wider array of classes. But it seems to me, at least, you're sort of fundamentally sort of engaged in the same basic activity, right? Okay, so sort of specifying our goal and then working backwards, right? What that means is that, well, the first few years of graduate school are going to be pretty hectic, right? Pretty daunting, right? Professors expect more of us, right? We can't turn in the same sort of seminar papers we did as undergrads, but we also need to be, seriously developing as teachers and researchers, right? And if you're anything like me, when you arrived in graduate school, so when you got to your department on that first day, right, you had very little pedagogical experience, right? And you were also somewhat limited, you had somewhat limited exposure to research, right, to real research. And if you're also like me, and this gets us to sort of mentoring, right, you had this sort of sense that if you could just select the right mentor, right, so if you could just pick the correct advisor, right, then this person will be able to sort of walk you through the process, right? They will sort of hold your hand and guide you through the maze. Be there at every, sort of step of your development, right? Anticipate your needs, worries, right? Now, there are probably some really selfless, sensitive advisors who are willing and perhaps able to play this role, right? And there are probably some mentor-mentoree relationships where the mentor acts as this sort of kind of guru, right? Who has this sort of holistic approach, right? And attends not just to your dissertation, but actively addresses many of the concerns that sort of naturally arise during grad school, right? But I say most people don't have this kind of relationship with their advisor, dissertation advisor, or their just mentor. And that's not because, your advisor or mentor dislikes you, right? Or it's also not because, your advisor is lazy, right? Not necessarily. There are just going to be certain issues that your advisor is inevitably going to be sort of unable to address, or perhaps they won't even sort of register certain things as sort of issues or concerns, right? And I think if you're like me, at least, they're going to be scenarios where they just don't register things, or they're just unable to address them, and you're not going to be willing to really push them, right? Or at least you'll be hesitant. And I think this is a pretty general problem, right? We all have, we all have to deal with the fact that, our advisors aren't omniscient, right? They don't always register that we're struggling. They won't always realize what we're struggling with, and nor will they always be, sympathetic, right? They're also humans, right? So they have families and other personal and professional, right, obligations, lots of commitments of their own, right? And so they can't play the role of this sort of all-encompassing advisor. Okay, so instead of putting all your sort of eggs in one basket, so to speak, and looking to them whenever things go sour, right? Yeah, I think it's worth developing sort of a network of individuals, right, that you can turn to. So no one individual in the network can attend to all of your needs or worries, right? So that's expected. But instead, the sort of goal should be to develop a pool of individuals that you could potentially draw from, right? And moreover, you know who to approach when dealing with a problem you have in, say, teaching, right? Who to approach when you get writer's block, right? Who to approach when you're trying to submit a paper to a journal for the first time, right? Or maybe even who to approach when you're not sure who you should approach, right? When it comes to a particular problem, right? And so what I'm going to do is suggest that this network of potential mentors, if you will, right, is much larger than you might initially anticipate. And that is in part because while your department may sort of officially have 10 or 15 professors, I think that your department actually has more like 20 or 25 professors, right? And so how is that? Well, once again, there's not that much of a difference between a senior grad student, right, and a postdoc or assistant professor, right? So many senior graduate students, I think, are perfectly capable of doing my work, doing the work of an assistant professor, right? Unfortunately, the job market is so horrible that many people who are perfectly qualified for the job of assistant professor, right? That is, that they can carry out all the required tasks, right? They can teach, they can publish, right? Many of these people will have a difficult time, right, securing a job as a professor. And so the fact that the world is so horrible, I think, obscures the fact that many of your peers are essentially assistant professors. Okay, so before we sort of go further down this path, I want to explore this idea a little more, right? But let's run back and talk a little bit more about the sort of your official mentor, your dissertation advisor, right? Or the person who will presumably play that role when the time comes to start thinking about a thesis or a dissertation. Okay, so at a minimum, right, what should we expect from our advisors, right? Well, once again, right, at a minimum, we should be able to discuss our research interests with them, bounce ideas off of them, and through discussion, get a better sense of, how they see the field, what they think of the various trends in their area of specialization, right? And I think this is all really, really important and valuable information. So it helps contextualize our own work, right? And there's no easier, and I'd say quicker way to become familiar with an area than simply talking with an expert in the field, right? And furthermore, in addition to all that, your advisor is expected, of course, to read your drafts, right? Give you detailed feedback on your work. And so, I don't want to sort of undersell any of this, right? So this is no small feat, right? It takes a lot of time and effort to read and digest, right, papers, nonetheless a whole dissertation, right, to provide comments and detailed feedback, right? It's no small task to sort of help shape the contours of a major project like a dissertation. And furthermore, right, few relationships, in fact, I'd say basically no relationship that you have in the future is going to entitle you, right, to this level of sort of academic help and support, right? And so I think it's really, really crucial that you use it, right? So post PhD, I've experienced this so many times, right? So post PhD, you will sort of wish you had someone you could force to read and comment on your work, right? So after working on a project for 3 months, 6 months, right? Fill in the blank, so many months in isolation, right? It's so valuable to get an informed outsider's opinion, right? So someone who knows the area well, but sort of has that distance from your paper, right? So they have a better perspective than you do. And post PhD, right? I have spent lots and lots of time and energy, right? Sort of helping others, strengthening relationships I have with others in my field by reading papers, giving feedback, right? So when my turn comes, right, I have a paper I want to submit, I can depend on them for feedback on my work as well, right? Okay, so once again, right, at minimum, right, this is what you should sort of expect, right? Now, most advisors go sort of beyond this. So maybe they provide emotional support, right? Maybe they eventually become a friend, as Denise sort of gestured at earlier, right? Maybe they're very active and helpful when it comes to navigating, I don't know, the journal system or the job market, right? Maybe they read all of your job market materials really, really closely. But in general, there are going to be some areas, right, where they're either unwilling to help, unable to help, or just unaware that you have some particular need, right, and would benefit from assistance. And once again, you, if you're like me, right, will not want to sort of push them, right? So just to give you an example, right, so my advisor, really shaped how I see my field, obviously, gave me lots of helpful suggestions in the course of our conversations as to what research topics to pursue. He helped assess whether my arguments were persuasive, whether my conclusions were like reasonable. And he also opened a lot of doors for me as well, right? So I was able to take a bunch of cool graduate level courses outside of philosophy in experimental social science and economics and biology, in large part, right, because of the relationship he had established between philosophy and many other departments, right? But when it came to navigating the journal system, right, so when it came to actually preparing my paper for review, trying to make my paper sort of referee proof, so I don't, unintentionally step on anyone's toes or piss off a referee, right, my advisor was like really hopeless, actually. And so we talk about ideas. I'd spend, some time writing something, I'd send it to him. And then within 24 hours, he'd shoot me an email, right? And always, the email was always very, very short, usually, quite positive. And that was it, right? So, something like, this looks really good. Glad you finally wrote this or something, right? Every now and then he might include a minor suggestion, right, as to how to like improve this, because he knows I'm going to send it off to a journal, right? So for once, so for instance, one time he told me to delete a pun that I had in my paper, right? So I was discussing some political philosophers, and I said, here, I'm going to share. Okay. I was discussing a political philosophy piece, and I said of some political philosophers that they see the world through Rawls-colored glasses, right? Which in retrospect was probably the right call to remove that from the paper, right? He said it's more appropriate for like cocktail banter and less for an academic paper. Fair enough, right? But beyond that, I got almost no assistance from him when it came to sort of a pretty important component of the job, right, which is publishing. And so what happened? Well, I flailed for a while. I made some, not so great decisions. I wasted time and sent a paper to a journal that was obviously not a good match, right? I once just sat on a paper for a whole year, a paper that my advisor thought was really, really good. But I was hesitant to send it out because, I thought it was just not careful enough. I wasn't careful enough in my presentation. I worried I hadn't sufficiently motivated the topic, right? I just felt uncomfortable sharing these worries with my advisor, right? And furthermore, I felt uncomfortable demanding, right, that he like reread the paper, right, with an eye toward publication. Okay, so now what I'm going to say next is going to sound kind of obvious, right? But once again, there are these sort of, I'd say, sort of hidden professors in your hidden assistant professors in your department, right? So people who don't yet have their PhD, right, but possess the skills and the know-how to carry out the job of a professor, right? So a second-year student, if you're having, if a second-year student, for instance, is having trouble, right, encouraging discussion in the classroom, right, they might want to seek out an advisor, their formal advisor, or maybe another professor, or you may feel more comfortable, right, contacting a 5th or 6th year in your department, right? Likewise, if you're stuck as a 2nd or 3rd year graduate student and you've been sitting on a paper for 6 months, like I was, right? Identify some of the hidden professors in your department. Right? You know who they are, right? These are the people who have published successfully already, and ask them if they could sort of take a look, right? Now, I think looking to one's peers for help, right, is, as I said, this is a pretty natural, right? It's pretty obvious. It's a pretty natural response. You turn your attention to those who have successfully gone through the process already, and you try and learn something from them, right? And I'm sure many of you actually do something like this without even, giving it much thought, right? Sort of natural. So what I want to sort of explore a little bit is what's the benefit, though, of conceiving of a 5th or 6th year or 7th year graduate student as an assistant professor, right? So, that's one of the suggestions I'm making here, right? Don't think of them as just a graduate student with a couple extra years under their belt. Instead, maybe it's good to view them as a professor, right? As an assistant professor. Is there any value in this suggestion, right? Well, I think there is some. For me, at least, when that switch happened, right? So when I viewed my advisors, senior graduate students, right, as professors in their own right, I think things changed for the better for me. Right? So first off, right, if I'm lost or confused, right, so I'm trying to navigate once again the journal system, and I'm not having much luck, then my first instinct is to approach other professors in the department, maybe, right? They are professors because they publish. Well, not all of them are able or willing to assist in this fashion, right? And moreover, let's just be honest, right? Some senior professors, right, the sort of king and queen makers in our field, they just experience the journal system a bit differently than the rest of us, right? And I think this holds for the classroom as well, right? Super senior, famous people, right, just sort of experience things a bit differently than we do. Right? Furthermore, they've also just been doing this for so long that many of the norms and implicit rules are just so internalized, right? They're so ingrained in them that it's difficult for them to make all this explicit, right? And so they might incorrectly think that you already have a pretty good grasp of the rules of the game, right, so to speak. So a hidden assistant professor, though, will in many cases have a pretty grounded understanding of, the system, right? They're still trying to learn how to best navigate it, of course, right? But I think it's much easier for them to help you bridge the gap between where you currently are, right, in your understanding and where you need to be. Right? So basically, right, this is someone who's not only able to do the job of a professor, right, teach and research, but I think in some sense might be better positioned to help you, right? But I think it's easy to overlook this person, though, right? So the senior graduate student, the sort of elder graduate students, I think it's easy to overlook them because they aren't actually, right, a professor, right? And if you think about them more, if you think about your more senior peers as graduate students in name only, right, then I think it's more likely you will recognize that they could provide, right, lots of valuable guidance. Okay, so here's another reason why I think you should, why it might be helpful to view some of your more senior peers as sort of hidden assistant professors. You might be more willing to approach a senior graduate student you do not know well, right? So someone you don't have a personal relationship or friendship with, if you view them as an assistant professor, right? So we don't think it's improper or awkward to approach an actual, right, assistant professor in a department, right? We don't think that I first need a personal relationship, right, in order to approach this person, right? but for me at least, I was really only inclined to reach out to those more senior graduate students that I had a pre-existing social relationship with, that I had rapport with. Right? And this might be problematic, right? Especially if, as a minority, you find it a bit more difficult to establish rapport with some of your peers. Right? So when I began to view sort of more senior grad students as less peers and more as just professors, it actually became easier for me to sort of initiate discussion. Right? Okay, so maybe one last point. So another reason why you should perhaps consider viewing your peers as hidden assistant professors, you will feel less guilty when you ask for their time. Right? Now, I don't know how committed I am to this claim exactly, but my thought is that if one views the interaction as occurring not between two friends, right, but instead between a student and a professor, there might be less guilt, right, when I reach out and sort of ask for their time and guidance, right? Okay, so I know I'm running a little bit over time, so I'll just try and speed it up a little. I just have a little bit more. Okay, so we've discussed, right, your sort of official mentor or advisor. We talked about developing, right, maybe a sort of a broader network of support in your department, and how that network is perhaps larger than you might initially think, right? Namely, it should include not just some of the professors in the department, but also many of your peers who, by their qualifications at least, are essentially professors. And now let's talk briefly about sort of expanding beyond your department or even your university. Right? So I think this came up in a little bit of the discussion after the breakout rooms. So you might want to expand your network of informal advisors and mentors and contact professors at other institutions. Right? And so what are the benefits of doing that? Well, just like the relationship you have with your informal advisor, your dissertation advisor and mentor, right? You get access to their point of view, how they see things, what they think matters in the field, also gossip, if you're interested in that. You learn about the personalities of some of the other big names in your field, right? And in some cases, right, the benefits could be really, really large. They could be tremendous, right? And so I'm going to share one last time. Whoa, it's kind of creepy, actually. Okay, so this is a pretty extreme, but I think amusing example. And it comes from an interview with Lori Paul, L.A. Paul. So Lori Paul is speaking about her time as a student. And this is actually prior to her even enrolling in a PhD program. All right, so what does she do? She says, quote, I wrote to a number of well-known philosophers, asking each of them if they could supervise a course by mail, consisting of my writing letters to them about their work, getting responses from them, and ultimately providing comments on a paper I wrote. So Nancy Cartwright, Lynn Rudder Baker, and Nathan Oaklander agreed to do this for me. Right? They were all extremely generous for their time, and I all three of them along with Quentin, an enormous debt. Right? Like, wow. So I actually first came across this passage when it was quoted by the economist Tyler Cowen, who some of you might know from his blog, The Marginal Revolution. And in the comment section, this is the blog, right? There were a lot of economists in the comment section complaining about how they cannot even get professors in their own department to respond to emails, right? So this poor guy or woman was saying, while I was working on my dissertation in economics, I emailed a number of fairly known anthropologists out of the blue to ask them about the anthro literature. I was shocked to find that almost all of them got back to me fairly quickly. By contrast, economists that I emailed out of the blue with similar kinds of questions would usually never get back to me, including professors in my own department. Right? There's definitely a very different culture in respect to other disciplines. Right? Okay, so now, of course, L.A. Paul's experience here is not representative, right? So, sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing. It's also not necessary to get the support of three external, super famous and accomplished, philosophers to succeed in philosophy, right? But I think our experience is indicative, right? It indicates that philosophers, even quite senior ones, are going to be pretty open to forming more open to forming relationships with you than you'd initially suspect, right? And I'm willing to go down defending this claim, right? So I studied, economics and philosophy at both the graduate and undergraduate level, and let me tell you, like philosophers are, I think, much more willing to take time out of their day and support students than economists. Right? And so, Denise, I was glad to hear in your talk that it sounds like you were trained as a psychologist. I didn't want to throw any shade your way. Okay, so now, but still, this seems a bit crazy, right? So who does that? Who contacts three philosophers out of the blue asking them for favors? Right? Well, I think if you do it in sort of a thoughtful manner, it could really, really pay off, right? And so I was not quite as ambitious as L.A. Paul, right? Once again, who does that? I didn't contact three of the top people in the field as an undergraduate, but in grad school, right? I did sort of keep track of who was working in my niche area, right? And specifically, right, kept track of the generation maybe one above me, right? So people who are maybe 10, 15, 20 years older than me at the associate level. And at some point, right, when I had a paper, and I thought that a particular person might be interested in it, right, I wrote an email. I contacted a professor at another university, introduced myself, and then asked them if they'd be interested in looking at a paper which responds to their paper or touches upon some issues that they've thought really long and hard about, right? And so sometimes you get a polite no, but it's not too unusual to get some very helpful comments, right? Which is not only good for the purposes of trying to, get this paper polished and published, but it might also be the basis for a professional relationship, right? That you have with a more senior scholar, right? And so this outside mentor is someone who, like your peers in graduate school, right, is advanced enough to have a pretty good overview of the field, and they can help, but they're still in touch with things, right? And they can give you very concrete advice and information regarding conferences and journals, right? Okay, and so maybe I'll end with this, right? So, even if you're still a bit hesitant, right, to cold email people, so let me tell you, as someone who every once in a while, right, not too often, right, but every once in a while, I receive emails from postdocs or grad students. It's literally, like, I think the highlight of this this job, right? There's, I think, at least nothing more exciting from hearing from a graduate student who has similar interests, who has some familiarity with my work, right? Someone who appreciates, right, the sort of work that I'm interested in and the work that I'm doing, and thinks highly enough of me to go out of their way to reach out and really just put themselves in a vulnerable position, right? Sticking their neck out, right? Because I could just ignore them, right? I don't have any professional or institutional obligation to respond to them. Right, but anyway, so it is, for me at least, a big highlight of doing this sort of work. And I've had long back and forths over email with younger academics who I've never met, and even some non-academics who I probably will never meet, right? But they're enthusiastic and they're just really keen to sort of share ideas together, and are familiar with my past work on the topic. And so it's a real joy in that sense, right? And so you're not just helping yourself, right, when you contact people. I think you're also, right, sort of bringing joy to the lives of others. Okay, and yeah, so thanks for your guys' attention, and that's it. Yeah.
All right, yeah, thank you so much for your talk. Now I'm gonna pause the recording.